Hello, I'm Daniel Geretz, the Rabbi of Mayan in West Orange, New Jersey. This week's Parshat is actually different in Israel than it is outside of Israel. This week in Israel, we will be reading Parshat Bechukotai, and outside of Israel, we will be reading the double Parshat of Bechukotai. We've actually been off by one Parshat since the end of Pesach, and this is the week when we finally catch up and are in sync once again with our friends in Israel. One major portion of Parshat Bechukotai is the Tochacha, or a rebuke that God gives the people of Israel. Actually, in Parshat Bechukotai, it is called a Berit, a covenant. And the rebuke is a chilling list of terrible calamities that will befall the Jewish people as a result of not keeping our covenant with God. There is a second tochacha, a second rebuke, which can be found at the end of Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 28. And that is also called a berit in that set of psukim, a covenant, and it is another chilling list of calamities that will befall us if we do not keep our covenant with God. I'm going to stop now for a brief message from our sponsor, God. The same way that Shakespeare is not at rest when you read Shakespeare in Japanese, and Franz Kafka is not at rest when you read Kafka in Swahili, God is not fully at rest when you read a translation of the Torah. The Torah was originally written in Hebrew, and God prefers that when you study God's Torah, that you do so in the original language of Hebrew. Any translation necessarily also includes a spin put on the original texts by the translator. A translator can work to reduce the amount of spin, but it makes it very tedious to read the translation because generally there are lots of footnotes to explain shades of meaning that are present in the original text, which are very, very difficult to translate into a different language. God prefers that you study God's Torah in Hebrew, and I encourage each of you within your means and capability to make an effort to increase your knowledge of Hebrew. You can visit the Torat Chayim webpage and contact any member of Torat Chayim, and all of us will be happy to put you in touch with somebody in your area who will be able to direct you to resources where you can increase your knowledge of the Hebrew language according to your means, capability, and level. We now return to our regularly scheduled programming. It's interesting to look at the two different tochachas, the two different rebukes, and compare and contrast them. This is much more easily done in Hebrew because reading an English translation, one might miss an important difference in between the two tochachot. In English, some regional usage uses the term y'all, which is a term that is common in the South, or yins, which is a term that is common in the Pittsburgh area, or yous, which is a term that was common earlier in the 20th century before Archie Bunker popularized it and made it embarrassing to use that term. And that term is a plural second person pronoun. It refers to a group of individuals in the second person, as opposed to an individual. Now in English, we use the term you. You can mean I'm speaking to an individual. You can also mean that I'm speaking to a group of individuals. The difference in between the tochachot, if you look in the Hebrew, it's much more obvious, is that the tochacha in the book of Leviticus, in Sefer Vayikra, at the end of Parshat Bechukotai, is phrased in the plural. Etchem, lachem, you, as a group of individuals, not you as an individual. The tochacha in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, is phrased in the singular. Ata, becha, lecha, you as an individual. Classically, our commentators have looked at this difference and explained it as these are two different covenants. The first covenant in Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, is a covenant with individuals. It was given while the people of Israel were still around Mount Sinai, about a year after Revelation at Sinai. And it was, the audience was meant as a group of disparate individuals. We had just gone out from Egypt, and we were a tribe, a collection of individuals, not yet a nation. And therefore, the Tochacha is phrased to a group, because God is speaking to a bunch of individuals, not a nation. The Tochacha at the end of Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, was given shortly before Moses died, on the precipice of the Jews entering the land of Canaan, conquering it. At that point, 40 years had elapsed, and during that period of time, we had become a nation. Therefore, it makes sense that the Tochacha is phrased in the singular, because God is not addressing a group of disparate individuals. God is addressing a nation. This is highlighted if you look at the end of Tochacha, the Tochacha in the book of Deuteronomy. It's clear that this covenant in Deuteronomy is different than the covenant in Sefer Vayikra, because it explicitly says, one second, these are the terms of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which he had made with them at Horeb, which is Mount Sinai. There's another explanation for the difference in the singular and plural language. If you count the number of verses in the Tochacha, you will find that the Tochacha in Sefer Devarim is 54 verses, and the Tochacha in Sefer Vayikra in Leviticus is only 27 verses. The Tochacha in Sefer Devarim is twice as long as the Tochacha in Sefer Vayikra. You can think about it this way. When we suffer in life, which we all will all do, we all have our individual struggles. The struggles may be different. Some of us may struggle economically. Some of us struggle with various different forms of loss, with being unable to find a community where we really feel at home and we feel that we fit in. There are many different ways that we struggle as individuals. That is difficult. It is difficult for each of us. And we need to recognize that each of us have our own struggles and that we all face difficulties in our life. There's a second form of tragedy that occurs in our lives, and that is when we struggle alone. When we struggle without the support of others, and we struggle without the support of God, then that is truly a terrible tragedy. It compounds and multiplies the dimension of the struggling and the suffering associated with it so much more. The Tochacha in Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, is twice as long because it is phrased in the singular. It is an individual struggling alone. The Tochacha in Vayikra, in Leviticus, is shorter because it is phrased in the plural. It is all of us struggling together, supporting each other mutually. If you look at the end of the Tochacha in Devarim, you'll see it just ends. There is no hopeful message at the end. If you look at the end of Tochacha in this week's Parshat, in Parshat Bechukotai, you'll see that there is a hopeful message at the end. That hopeful message is, I will, yet even then, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them or spurn them so as to destroy them, annulling my covenant with them, for I, the Lord, am their God. I will remember in their favor the covenant with the ancients, whom I freed from the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations to be their God, I, the Lord. There is a hopeful message. It is suffering, but it is suffering with an end. In the book of Deuteronomy, it is suffering. There is no hopeful message. It can seem like the suffering will go on forever. It will never end. I want to turn to another text for a moment, and that is 3 verses at the end of Tehillim Perek Tzadik Aleph, Psalms chapter 91. I'll read in Hebrew and then I'll read in English. Kivi chashak va'afaltehu asagavehu ki yadashani, nikra'eni ve'enehu imo anochi v'tzara achaltzehu va'achabdehu. Orech yamim asbiehu ve'arehu ishuati. Because he is devoted to me, I will deliver him. I will keep him safe, for he knows my name. When he calls on me, I will answer him. I will be with him in distress. I will rescue him and make him honored. I will let him live to a ripe old age and show him my salvation. When people call out to God, when they are in distress, God will answer them. How does God answer them? God is not in this world. One cannot hear or sense God with any of the 5 senses. I will suggest that the way that God answers is through others. Each of us in this world, when we help those who are in need, when we help those who are struggling, we're not only doing a nice thing, we are literally bringing God into this world and enabling God to be sensed by somebody who is suffering and somebody who is struggling. We, each of us, when we do those things, are not only doing good things, we are doing God's work. We are being God's ambassadors. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.